The Chicago skyline bled violet into darkness, 60 floors of glass and steel separating Jun Shin's world from the rest of humanity. Inside the penthouse, sandalwood incense curled through air thick enough to choke on, mixing with the low electric hum of the city that never stopped scheming below. Desmarais stood 3 feet from his desk, her tablet pressed against the sapphire silk of her dress, watching Jun's fountain pen scratch across documents that would relocate 3 rival shipping hubs without a single shot fired. He didn't need guns, he had something far more dangerous: information, leverage, and a woman who knew where every digital skeleton was buried. That was the architecture of their 4-year arrangement. This careful construction of professional distance and the kind of tension that vibrated between them like a violin string pulled too tight, humming a note neither of them dared name. Jun signed his name with the precision of a surgeon, his dark hair falling forward as the tattoo on his neck, a creeping vine of thorns, shifted with each controlled breath. His silence wasn't empty, it was a weapon he'd sharpened to a lethal edge. Desmarais' phone chimed, a soft disruption in their synchronized rhythm. She glanced down, and something transformed her face. A smile, genuine, unguarded, the kind of smile Jun realized, with a jolt that felt like a blade between his ribs, she had never once given him. "I'm leaving early tonight," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Everything for the Vegas merger is already on your tablet." Jun didn't look up. The pen continued its surgical work. "We have the deportation briefing at 8. "Reschedule it." She slipped the phone into her clutch with the finality of a door closing. "I have a date tonight." The scratching stopped. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was the kind of silence that exists right before a storm breaks, before a predator decides whether to let its prey run or break it in half. 10 seconds stretched into eternity. Then, with movements so controlled they looked rehearsed, Jun reached into his breast pocket, extracted a silver case, and lit a cigarette. He hadn't smoked in 3 years. Desmarais' hand was already on the elevator button when Jun's voice cut through the smoke-heavy air like a scalpel through silk. "His name is Julian Vance." She froze, her finger hovering an inch from polished brass. The words hung between them, impossible and precise. "He's an architect," Jun continued, his voice carrying that same surgical calm he used when dismantling rivals. "Graduated from Cornell, drives a Tesla Model S, allergic to shellfish. He likes Miles Davis, hates cilantro, and right now he's sitting at a corner table at the violet hour, checking his watch every 90 seconds because you're already 12 minutes late." Desmarais turned slowly, her sapphire dress catching the dying light from the windows. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, but Jun could see the pulse hammering at the base of her throat, a tell she'd never quite managed to eliminate. "You've been tracking me." It wasn't a question. Her voice was low, dangerous in a way that would have made most men step back. Jun took another drag, letting smoke curl from his lips before answering. "No." He stood then, moving around the desk with the kind of fluid grace that made him look more like a panther than a man. "I've been tracking him." He was closer now, close enough that Desmarais could smell the tobacco mixing with his cologne, something dark and expensive that she'd memorized years ago without meaning to. Close enough to see the way the thorn tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. "Because Julian Vance doesn't exist, Desmarais." Jun's eyes held hers, dark and unreadable. "He's a digital fabrication, created 48 hours ago, clean credit history, a LinkedIn profile with exactly the right amount of professional connections, with a dating app account with photos purchased from a stock agency in Prague." The elevator chimed behind her, doors sliding open to reveal an empty car. an escape route. But Desmarie's feet felt welded to the marble floor. "You're lying." But even as she said it, she could hear the hairline fracture in her own certainty. Jun reached into his jacket, not for another cigarette, but for his phone. He swiped once, then held it out to her. On the screen, layers of metadata scrolled past. IP addresses, Photoshop timestamps, domain registration records, all pointing to a ghost. Desmarie stared at the evidence, her mind racing through the past week. The charming messages, the shared taste in jazz, the way Julian had seemed almost too perfect, like someone had reverse-engineered her ideal man from an algorithm. "Why?" Her voice was barely a whisper now. Jun's expression shifted then, something raw flickering across his face before he locked it down again. "Because someone wants you scared, or dead, or turned." He stubbed out the cigarette on the edge of his marble desk, leaving a small black mark on the pristine surface. "And I haven't figured out which one yet." "You want to know what's terrifying?" Desmarie's voice had changed. All the softness burned away to reveal something metallic underneath. She reached into her bag, not for her phone this time, but for a manila folder she'd been carrying all evening. She threw it onto Jun's desk, papers scattered across the black marble like evidence at a crime scene. "That is what's terrifying, Jun." He glanced down. Bank statements, offshore accounts, transaction records, spanning 4 years. All with one thing in common, her name on every single wire transfer. "I found your second ledger." Desmarie's hands were steady now, her attorney interrogation voice fully activated. "The one you thought I'd never see. $17 million, Jun, funneled into accounts I never opened, in countries I've never visited, using signatures I never signed." Jun's face remained impassive, but she saw his jaw tighten fractionally. A crack in the armor. "You've been setting me up." She took a step closer, and now she was the predator, circling. Every transaction perfectly documented, every deposit time-stamped and verified. When the feds finally come, and we both know they're coming, all roads will lead straight to me, the fall girl. The black woman who embezzled from her employer and fled the country. The city lights behind them flickered on, one by one, as Chicago prepared for nightfall. The penthouse suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. "You think that's what this is?" Jun's voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it now. Something that sounded almost like hurt. "What else could it be?" Desmarie's voice cracked on the last word, despite her best efforts. 4 years, Jun. 4 years I've stood 3 feet from your desk, memorizing passwords and moving money and cleaning up bodies, metaphorically speaking. 4 years of telling myself I was different, that you saw me as more than just convenient, and the whole time you were building my cage. Jun moved so fast, she didn't have time to react. One moment he was behind his desk. The next, he was standing inches from her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his skin. "Look at the dates, Desmarie." His voice was low, almost gentle, which somehow made it more dangerous. "Go on, look at them." She didn't want to, but she found herself glancing down at the papers scattered across his desk, her eyes finding the timestamps almost against her will. The first deposit, the day after she was hired. The second, 3 days later. Regular transfers every month for 4 years, growing steadily larger with each passing quarter. "Those transfers started before you had access to anything sensitive," Jun said, "before you knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically or otherwise. Before you became the one person in this organization I actually trust." Jun reached past her, his arm brushing against hers as he grabbed the scattered papers and aligned them with meticulous precision. The contact was brief, but it left a trail of heat across Desmarie's skin that she hated herself for noticing. "That money isn't a trap," he said, laying out the documents in chronological order. "It's an exit strategy." Desmarie's breath caught.
What? The day after I hired you, I knew. Jun's voice was softer now, but no less intense. I knew you were too smart, too capable, too good to spend your life in a world like mine. So I started building you a way out. He pulled up a different screen on his tablet, showing a portfolio that made Desmarie's head spin. Legitimate investments. Clean money?
Laundered through so many legal channels it had come out pristine on the other side. Real estate in her name, bonds, stock portfolios, a Swiss account with a balance that could fund 3 lifetimes. 17 million in liquid assets, Jun continued. Another 23 in investments that mature over the next decade. It's more than enough to disappear, to become anyone you want to be, an architect in Barcelona, a gallery owner in Paris, a woman who never has to make choices like the ones you've made for me. Desmarie stared at the numbers, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. I don't understand. I was making sure that if I ever disappeared, if I ever went to prison or died or burned this empire to the ground, you'd never have to work for a man like me again. Jun's hand moved as if to touch her face, then stopped, hovering in the charged space between them. You were never the fall girl, Desmarie. You were always the one who got away. The sincerity in his voice was more terrifying than any threat. Because threats she understood. Threats she could defend against. But this raw, unguarded honesty, this she had no armor for. Then why lie about Julian? Her voice was barely audible. Jun's expression hardened again, the vulnerable moment sealing over like a wound. Because I'm not lying. He turned the tablet around, pulling up a different screen. Live security footage, the Violet Hour restaurant, corner table. And there sat Julian Vance, exactly as Jun had described him, checking his watch. But he wasn't alone. Across from him sat a man in a grey suit, a man whose face Desmarie recognized from news reports and courthouse steps, and the nightmares of everyone in Jun's world. Marcus Reeves, the district attorney who'd built his career on dismantling organized crime operations. Your date isn't an architect, Jun said quietly. He's a deep-cover informant, and he's not after me, Desmarie. The camera angle shifted, zooming in on Julian's face as he spoke to the DA. In his hand was a photograph. Jun enhanced the image. It was Desmarie's staff ID photo. He's after the keys you hold. The elevator chimed again. Desmarie spun toward the sound, her instincts screaming at her to run. But the doors slid open to reveal not the security team she expected. Min Ho Shin stood in the car, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his designer jacket hanging open. In his right hand was a suppressed pistol, the matte black metal catching the ambient light like a promise. But he wasn't pointing it at Desmarie. The barrel was aimed directly at his brother's chest. I'm sorry, Hyung, Min Ho said, his voice trembling with something that might have been regret, or fear, or both. But this has gone on long enough. Jun didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon, or dive for cover. He simply stood there, still too close to Desmarie, his body angled slightly in front of hers in a way that was probably unconscious, but made her heart do something complicated and unwelcome. Put the gun down, Min Ho. Jun's voice carried no fear, only a bone-deep weariness. I can't. Min Ho stepped out of the elevator, the weapon never wavering. His eyes flicked to Desmarie, and there was genuine anguish there. The DA didn't find us on his own, Jun. Someone gave them the entry codes to our server farm, someone with access to everything. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Desmarie gave them the codes last night, Min Ho continued, and now there were tears tracking down his face. She's the one who sold us out. She's been working with the feds for 6 months. Desmarie felt the accusation like a physical blow. That's insane. I never... Your phone, Min Ho cut her off. They traced it to a dead-drop location in Millennium Park at 11:47 p.m. last night, the same location the DA's tech team retrieved a USB drive containing our entire server architecture. Demarie's mind raced. Last night. 11:47, she'd been home, asleep, her phone charging on her nightstand. Hadn't she? She looked at Jun, expecting to see doubt or fury or betrayal. But his expression was unreadable, his eyes still locked on his brother. "I know," Jun said quietly. The words sucked the oxygen from the room. Minho's gun hand faltered. "What?" "I know she gave them the codes," Jun repeated, and now there was something almost gentle in his voice. "Because I'm the one who told her to do it." Demarie's world tilted sideways. "Jun, what are you—" "The codes she delivered were dummy credentials," Jun continued, his attention still fixed entirely on Minho. "They lead to a mirror server I set up 3 months ago, and right now, that server is uploading every encrypted communication you've had with Dmitry Volkov's organization directly into the DA's evidence system." Minho's face went white. "No, that's not— I never—" "You've been planning to overthrow me since October," Jun said, and his voice could have frozen the city below. "You thought you were using Desmarais to expose me, but you were just the delivery system for your own arrest warrant." The gun clattered to the floor. The gun hit the marble floor with a sound like a gavel falling. Minho staggered backward, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror as the reality of his situation crystallized around him like ice. But Demarie wasn't watching him anymore. She was watching Jun, her mind replaying the last 6 months in fast forward. Every late-night meeting, every encrypted file he'd asked her to transfer, every seemingly random question about her phone's location settings. The USB drive she'd been asked to drop off at Millennium Park, a backup for their overseas partners, he'd said. He'd choreographed her betrayal, used her as an unwitting weapon against his own blood. "You played me," she whispered, and the words tasted like ash. Jun finally turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Not guilt, not satisfaction. Something far more complicated that she couldn't name and didn't want to. "I protected you," he corrected softly. "There's a difference." "By making me look like a traitor?" "By making sure that when this building fills with federal agents in approximately," he glanced at his watch, 8 minutes, "you'll have documentation proving you were acting under duress as a cooperating witness. Minho was the real target. You were just the hand that delivered him." Demarie's legs felt unstable. She wanted to scream or hit him or demand answers. But before she could do any of those things, she heard herself laugh. A sharp, brittle sound that didn't belong to her. "You're unbelievable." "I'm thorough," Jun said, and there was the faintest hint of something that might have been humor in his voice. Minho had collapsed against the elevator wall, his entire body shaking. But Demarie's attention snagged on something else. A small smile playing at the corner of Jun's mouth. Not triumph. Something darker. Something that looked almost like satisfaction at her anger. And that's when the final piece clicked into place. "No," Demarie said slowly, her voice dropping to a register that made Jun's eyes sharpen with sudden alertness. "No, you're not that thorough. You're that paranoid." She stepped away from him, creating distance she suddenly, desperately needed. Her mind was racing now, assembling fragments into a picture that made her stomach drop. "You expected me to figure this out?" she continued, her voice gaining strength. "You wanted me to find that second ledger. You wanted me angry enough to confront you right here, right now, with Minho listening through whatever surveillance you have running in this office." Jun's expression didn't change, but she saw his shoulders tense fractionally. Confirmation. You needed me to look like I was on your side when the real betrayal came to light. Demarie's hands were trembling now, not with fear, but with a rage so pure it felt like ice in her veins. But here's what you didn't account for, Jun. She reached up slowly, deliberately, and pulled a small device from the decorative clip, holding back her natural curls. It looked like a hair accessory, platinum and diamonds, that caught the light beautifully. But Jun's face went absolutely still when he saw the small LED blinking red on its underside, a remote access key. While you two were playing chess, Demarie said, her voice now carrying the kind of quiet authority that made even Jun Shin pay attention, I was playing the market. She pressed a button on the device. Somewhere in the building, servers began executing commands that had been queued for months, waiting for this exact moment. I didn't give the DA dummy codes, Jun. Demarie's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. I gave them the real ones, to your offshore holdings, to the syndicate's actual accounts. And while you were so busy watching your brother and protecting me from threats I never asked for protection from, I emptied every single one. The silence that followed was absolute. Minho's head snapped up, his expression shifting from devastation to confused hope. Jun stood perfectly motionless, his dark eyes fixed on Demarie with an intensity that should have been frightening, but instead felt like standing too close to an open flame. "How much?" His voice was barely audible. "All of it," Demarie replied. 43 million in cryptocurrency, another 60 in bearer bonds, 18 shell corporations dissolved and liquidated. I've been moving your money for 4 years, Jun. Did you really think I didn't know where the real vaults were? For 3 seconds. That felt like 3 years. Nobody moved. Then Jun laughed. It started low, almost inaudible, then built into something rich and genuine and utterly unexpected. He laughed like a man who'd just heard the punchline to a joke he'd been waiting his entire life to hear. Minho stared at his brother like he'd lost his mind. "Hyung, she just stole everything." "I know," Jun said, and he was still laughing, his eyes never leaving Demarie's face. "I know she did." He moved toward her then, not with the predatory grace he'd shown earlier, but with something that looked almost like relief. He stopped just inches away, close enough that Demarie could see the gold flecks in his irises, close enough to watch his pupils dilate in the low light. "I put a tracker in the currency itself," Jun said softly, intimately, like he was sharing a secret meant only for her. "At the blockchain level, embedded in the code. Every coin you moved, every bond you transferred. They're all sending location pings to a satellite network I own." Demarie's triumphant expression faltered. "You're lying." "I'm really not." Jun reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered against the smooth brown skin of her jaw, and she hated the way her body responded to the touch. A shiver that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the way he was looking at her. "I knew you'd take the money," he continued, his voice low and rough. "I was counting on it. Because you're brilliant and ruthless, and you've been watching me operate for 4 years. You learned from the best. Then why let me?" Demarie's voice came out shakier than she intended. Jun's thumb traced a line along her cheekbone, a touch so gentle it felt like a contradiction to everything he was. "Because the money was always yours anyway. I just needed you to steal it so I could chase you." The city stretched out behind them, 60 floors of glass and steel, and distance from the rest of the world. Somewhere below, sirens were beginning to wail. The federal raid Jun had mentioned. The carefully orchestrated collapse he'd been planning for months, maybe years. "You wanted a date tonight, Demarie?" Jun's other hand came up to frame her face, his touch achingly careful, despite the calluses she could feel on his palms. "You have one?" With me. On a plane to a country with no extradition treaty and no questions about where money comes from. You're insane. But she didn't pull away. I'm practical, Jun corrected. I needed to burn my empire to the ground. You needed to believe you'd beaten me. We both got what we wanted. Desmarie's mind was reeling. You orchestrated your own downfall just to, what, run away with me? Not run away. Jun leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. Start over, as equals, no boss, no assistant, no power dynamic. Just two people who are too smart and too damaged and too dangerous for the normal world. Behind them, Min Ho made a sound of disgust. This is insane. You're both insane. Probably, Jun agreed, without looking away from Desmarie. But insanity seems like a reasonable response to wanting something you can't have while being trapped in a life you never chose. And what about him? Desmarie nodded toward Min Ho, her eyes searching Jun's face for any sign of regret or guilt. He'll take the deal the DA offers him. Testify against the Volkov organization, spend 3 years in minimum security, and come out with his life. Jun's voice was matter-of-fact. I made sure the evidence against him was serious enough to flip him, but not serious enough to bury him. He's my brother. I'm not a monster. You're something, Desmarie muttered. Jun's smile was slow and devastating. I'm yours, if you want me. The sound of boots on stairs echoed from somewhere far below. The federal agents were in the building now, moving through floors with the systematic precision of a military operation. They had maybe 3 minutes before this penthouse became a crime scene. Desmarie should have been running, should have been putting as much distance as possible between herself and Jun Shin and this spectacular disaster. Instead, she found herself studying his face like it was a map to territory she'd been forbidden to explore for 4 years. What makes you think I'd go anywhere with you? She asked, but her voice had lost its edge. Because you're still here. Jun's hands slid from her face to her shoulders, his touch burning through the silk of her dress. Because you could have run 10 minutes ago and you didn't. Because you spent 4 years watching me from 3 feet away, and I spent 4 years pretending I didn't know you were the most dangerous person in my world. Dangerous how? You made me want something more than power. His admission hung between them, vulnerable and raw. That's the most dangerous thing of all. Desmarie's breath caught. She'd imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways during countless sleepless nights. Imagine Jun finally admitting he saw her as more than an asset, but she'd never imagined it like this, surrounded by the burning wreckage of his empire, with federal agents closing in, with his brother watching from the elevator, like they were performing a play he didn't understand. The date at the jazz club was a boring idea anyway, Jun murmured, echoing her own thoughts from earlier, in a way that made her wonder if he'd been reading her mind all along. I don't know. Desmarie allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine one she'd given him in 4 years. I think the suspense was worth it. The lights flickered, emergency protocols engaging, the building's systems recognizing law enforcement override codes. They were out of time. Jun's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with surprising gentleness. There's a helicopter on the roof. Pilot's been on standby since 6 o'clock. He'll take us to a private airfield. From there, São Paulo, then Singapore, then anywhere you want to go. And if I say no? Something complicated moved across Jun's face. Then I hand myself over to the agents downstairs. You take your 40 million and disappear, and we both spend the rest of our lives wondering what would have happened if we'd been brave enough to try. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't manipulation. It was just the truth, stark and simple and terrifying in its honesty. Desmarais looked at Min-ho, who was watching them with an expression somewhere between horror and reluctant understanding. "What about you?" "Me?" Min-ho's laugh was bitter. "I made my choices. I'll live with them." He met his brother's eyes. "Go, Hyung, before I change my mind and shoot you anyway." There was love in that statement, twisted and complicated but unmistakably real. Jun nodded once, a gesture of respect and goodbye and forgiveness all at once. Then he pulled Desmarais toward the emergency stairwell that led to the roof. The Chicago wind hit them like a physical force the moment they stepped onto the rooftop. Desmarais' dress whipped around her legs, her carefully styled curls breaking free to frame her face in wild corkscrews that caught the city lights like a halo. The helicopter sat 30 feet away, rotors already spinning in anticipation. Its sleek black body looked like something out of a military operation, all sharp angles and tinted glass that reflected the violet sky. Jun kept her hand in his as they ran, his grip firm but not controlling. Even now, even in this moment of escape, he was giving her the choice to pull away. She didn't. They reached the helicopter, and Jun pulled open the door, gesturing for her to climb in first. The interior was leather and dark wood, ridiculously luxurious for an escape vehicle. Desmarais slid into the seat, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Jun climbed in after her, pulling the door shut with a solid thunk that cut off the wind's howl. He reached across her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixing with cigarette smoke and something uniquely him, and buckled her seatbelt with practiced efficiency. "You thought of everything," she said, and she couldn't tell if it was admiration or accusation in her voice. "Not everything." Jun settled into his own seat, his eyes finding hers in the dim cabin light. "I didn't plan on actually wanting this, wanting you. That part was supposed to be strategy, exit plan, clean break. And now I'm terrified," he admitted with a rawness that made her chest tight. "Because this isn't strategy anymore, this is real." The helicopter lifted off with a lurch that pressed them back into their seats. Through the window, Desmarais watched the Shin Syndicate building fall away beneath them. She could see the federal agents swarming the lower floors, their flashlights creating constellations of light in the gathering darkness. She'd just stolen $40 million, helped orchestrate the downfall of one of Chicago's most powerful criminal organizations, gotten on a helicopter with a man who was equal parts salvation and damnation. And she had absolutely no idea if this was the stupidest or the smartest decision she'd ever made. Jun's hand found hers again in the space between their seats. His thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture so simple and intimate it felt more vulnerable than any confession. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you look beautiful when you're committing felonies." Despite everything, the chaos and danger and utter insanity of the situation, Desmarais laughed. A real laugh that came from somewhere deep in her chest, releasing 4 years of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "You're impossible." "I'm committed," Jun corrected with a slight smile. "There's a difference." The helicopter banked east, carrying them away from the city and toward whatever came next. Below them, Chicago glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and dangerous and already becoming memory. Desmarais looked at Jun, really looked at him in the soft red glow of the cabin lights. His perfect face was finally showing signs of exhaustion, the careful control slipping just enough for her to see the man underneath the kingpin. The thorned tattoo on his neck seemed less threatening now, more like a mark of everything he'd survived to get to this moment. "So what happens now?" she asked. Jun's eyes held hers with an intensity that made the air between them feel charged. "Now we find out if two people built for destruction can build something together instead." The helicopter climbed higher, carrying them into darkness, and uncertainty and possibility. Behind them, the empire burned. Ahead, nothing was guaranteed except each other.
And somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. So here's what I need to know. When exactly did you realize they were always meant to end up together? Was it the cigarette? The money? The moment she stole everything and he smiled? Drop a comment and let me know, because this story just proved that sometimes the best endings come from burning everything to the ground. If you're still breathing after that finale, hit subscribe, because I've got more twisted romances coming your way. And one last thing, what city are you in right now? I want to know how far this story traveled tonight.